So today we're going to review equations that involve the distributive property. So we're going to work with the distributive property and two-step equations. Our goal, I can use the distributive property to release the parenthesis and then solve the resulting two-step equation. And this can be found in page 1 of your packet. Mrs. Nord has talked to you in Excel or gone through these several scenarios in Excel. And before we get started, I just want to talk about some of the common errors. You're going to notice that these two are both expressions and this one is an equation. So let's start with the expressions. One of the most common errors is to just multiply the coefficient, the number on the outside, times the first term inside the parentheses. So this is very common for students or others to drop down the second term inside the parentheses. So we have to remember when side by side, when we have a coefficient, it's multiplying everything inside the parentheses. So the correct answer should be 4x and then 4 times 6, and it's a positive 6, so that would be positive 24. So that is what we should have. Next error is for recalling that we're multiplying is to get negative 5 times 2m, which would be negative 10m, and then to take negative 5 times 3, and to write that as negative 15. So here's where the error is. We have to recall that this is a negative 3. We're going to use our minus 3 like it's a negative 3. So the first term, negative 5 times 2m, would indeed be negative 10m. But then we'd have negative 5 times negative 3, and that would be a positive 15. And that is actually what the most frequent error I'm seeing, is to not use the sign in front of the term. So when we get to this next equation, this is not necessarily an error. I just want to acknowledge that Mrs. Nord has taught you two different ways. So please don't write this down quite yet, because we're going to use it the long way. She probably mentioned that one of the ways we could use this is, since this too is a coefficient and is multiplying this quantity, we could just go right straight ahead and divide by negative 2, which would cancel this out, leaving a plus 7. And we no longer have to use the parentheses, because this parentheses meant that we were multiplying, and we're not anymore. And on the other side, it would be equals negative 5. We would then continue to subtract 7 on both sides, leaving a equals negative 12. So I didn't want you to write that down, because we're not going to necessarily do that. We are going to use the distributive property with what's called multi-step equations. And so this may be embedded inside an equation, so we really want to go and use the old-fashioned way, or what we traditionally think about using the distributive property. So I'm going to take negative 2 times a and get negative 2a, and then, being very careful about the sign, negative 2 times positive 7 would give a negative 14, and in that way I've released the parentheses. You could have done it the other way, however, I'm going to encourage this way for the future lessons coming up in this unit. So let's just prove that we would indeed get the same answer. So now to solve, I'm going to start with the constant. I'm going to add 14 on both sides. That cancels out, leaving negative 2a. And on this side I have positive 24. And now I'm going to divide by negative 2 on both sides. And so this would cancel, leaving a equals, and if you recall, a positive divided by negative would be a negative, so it's negative 12, which is the same answer we just had a few minutes ago. So now let's move forward. We're going to do 4 of these together, and I'm going to ask you to do 4 on your own. I do want to caution you, the biggest error I see is the sign. So just go forth knowing that the signs are very important. Your calculator's your friend, and it's okay to use it. So we're going to start by taking 7 times y, and then 7 times positive 3. So that would be a positive 21. equals negative 28. So that wasn't too bad. Here's where a common error comes in. I'm going to subtract 21 on both sides. Now if I look at this, I might be fooled into thinking that 28 minus 21 would be 7, but I want you instead to think about you combining these terms. In fact, if you put negative 28 in your calculator and put minus 21, it is going to give you negative 49. And if you think about this as being negative 28, and if you think about this as being negative 21, and you're combining them or putting them together, you can see that it would indeed be negative 49. So that's another place that's very tricky, and we have to kind of really think about what we're doing when we're dealing with the negatives. So now I'm going to continue solving. I'm going to divide by 7 on both sides. Again, this cancels out, leaving y, and if your little faces help you or your calculator, I'm taking a negative divided by a positive. I'm going to get a negative answer, so it's negative 7. Next, once again, look at all these lovely signs. So we're going to start out by taking negative 8 times w. Again, I'm going to acknowledge this as negative 2. It says minus 2, but we're going to look at it like it's a negative. So I have a negative times a negative. That would again be this face, and I'm going to get a positive 16. Again, very common place to make an error. And the other side is equals, 40. Let me clean that up a little bit. Negative 40. So now we're ready to start our solving steps. I always want to get rid of the constant, the number that is not with the variable, and I'm going to do that by taking away 16 on both sides. All right, once again, very common place. I have to be very careful. Negative 40 minus 16, if I look at it logically, would take me down the number line. If I start at negative 40 and I'm moving down the number line, I should go deeper into the negatives if you want to think about it that way. So I'm going to get negative 8w, and over here I'm going to have negative 56. And again, calculator's your buddy. So I'm going to continue solving by dividing by negative 8 on both sides, and that's going to leave w equals a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so I'm going to get positive 7. Please turn to the next page. I am trying to move quickly, so if at any point you want to stop the video and copy down what we're doing, that's fine. So we're going to start over again. This time you're probably noticing you see fractions and you see decimals. So we can use the same process using the fractions and the decimals. And again, calculator is very useful. So I'm going to get 0 and 5/10 x, and then 0 and 5/10 times a positive 9 is going to give me a positive, and that's going to be 4 and 5/10. Go ahead and check your calculator to make sure you agree. And that's going to equal 8. We're going to continue now with our solving step. I'm going to subtract 4 and 5/10 on both sides. So if I don't have a calculator, I want to make sure I add a decimal and a 0 placeholder, so that because I'm subtracting and I need that 10th column. So what's going to happen is we've now eliminated the constant. I have 0 and 5/10 x equals 3 and 5/10. Again, if you don't have a calculator, you're going to borrow. 10 minus 5 is 5, and 7 minus 4 is 3. And then finally, we're going to eliminate the coefficient. We're going to do that. Side by side means multiply, so we're going to do the opposite. We're going to divide by 5/10 on both sides. So once again, this eliminates this, and we have left over x, and then 3.5 divided by 5/10. And if you're going to divide by hand, let me just recall that would be the setup. The top number gets the house, and because we cannot have a decimal on the outside, we would have to scoop this decimal over, which meant we would scoop this decimal over, and it's now going to be here. So what I'm really doing is I'm taking 5 and I'm dividing it into 35. So I don't know if you recall that rule, but we can't have a decimal in a divisor. So our next equation has a fraction, and once again, a more efficient way would be to use the reciprocal right now to eliminate that, and it would release the parentheses. But because we're going to be dealing with multi-step equations, and this might be embedded inside an equation, we're going to do this the way that we've been doing all of them. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to take 4/5 times n. So we have 4/5 times n, and then 4/5 times -10. And if you haven't multiplied fractions for a while times whole numbers, you're going to take 4 and 4/5 times, and our -10 would make in fraction form. So we would get -40 on top. When we multiply fractions, we multiply the numerator times the numerator, and then the denominator times the denominator. So we get 40, -40 over 5. And again, we would reduce that -40. We can also look at this like it's division. So -40 divided by 5 would be -8. So that's going to be -8. And again, you can use this on your calculator. Just want to take a moment to review since we haven't done that for a while. So now we've released the parentheses. Now comes the solving step. I have -8, so I'm going to add 8 to eliminate the constant. And now I have 4/5 n, and on this side I have 14. So now I do have to use my reciprocal. I could divide by 4/5. If you have a calculator, you can certainly do that. Or I would multiply by the reciprocal. So these would eliminate each other. 5 times 4 would be 20, and 4 times 5 would be 20, and become 1 and n. Now over here, if I'm going to do it without the calculator, I'm going to have to make sure that I have fractions multiplying a fraction. So I place 14 over 1, which is another way, the fraction way to say 14. And I would then continue. And the result, 14 times 5 would be 70, and 1 times 4 would be 4. So once again, to review, if you're not using your calculator, this means division. So we would take the top dog, put it in the house, so to speak, and we would divide by the bottom number. So 4 will go into 7 one time. So we're going to take away 4, and we have 30 left over. We have to drop down the 0, and now we're taking 4 into 30. That would go in 8 times, and I'd have 2 left over. Now, because 4 won't go into 2, I need to attach decimals. I'm going to drop down a 0 placeholder, and 4 will go into 20 5 times. So the answer is n equals 18 and 5/10. Okay, just noticed I didn't finish this off, so we'll answer here is 7, just to be clear. So would you please try 5, 6, 7, and 8 independently? Have a good day.